The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the Honourable Minister for Immigration.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I rise particularly today as the member for Cook, which represents the Sutherland Shire, as does the member for Hughes, in part. And there are two things about my community that I think are very relevant to this debate, Mr Deputy Speaker. The first one is that in the Shire we are a very self-reliant community. People work hard. They've started businesses, they've established family businesses that continue to this day, employing hundreds if not thousands of people. And they have always understood that the hard work and the investment they put in is where their reward comes from and where their future comes from. They have always understood that that business can be tough, that markets can be tough, and the way that they've always responded to this has not been one to seek the handout, but one to put the work in and to apply themselves to the challenges before them, and this has created an incredibly strong community. This great strength that exists within our community from an economic and small business perspective in particular translates into a strong social community as well, one of self-reliance, but also one of generosity to those around them. The other thing about my community, Mr Deputy Speaker, it has the largest number of Qantas employees of arguably any other electorate represented in this place. And it is that resilience and self-reliance that I know that my community will draw upon as they go through what I know is a very difficult time. And this is a difficult time for my community and the many people in my electorate who are affected by what is happening with Qantas. And this has been happening for some time. Mr Deputy Speaker. This is not a new issue. There will be many newcomers to this debate today, I suspect, but in my community this has been a long-term debate, and they have for some period of time watched as the commercial and international conditions that sit around how Qantas performs and is able to perform. They've seen that change, and they've seen that change for them. They've seen the change in the market share, which the Treasurer spoke about in this place here yesterday. They have seen these changes, and that has been an issue for concern for them for some time. And it is important that we understand and acknowledge in this debate, as I'm sure those in my community would like to, that Qantas has indeed and continues to play a central role in Australia's national life and in our economic life as well. It has and continues to serve our country, and all its employees have served our country extremely well. In good times and bad, Qantas has always been a great Australian airline, and since 1992 it has been a great Australian company. And its traditions and its success is something I think all Australians should feel very proud of. It has set standards. It has innovated. It has been able to connect Australia with the world and Australians with each other across this vast continent. It is an extraordinary story, an extraordinary Australian story. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want that story to continue. I don't want it to come to the shuddering halt that would be the product of the way that those opposite would seek to see its future. I want to see a future for Qantas, for the people who work for Qantas, for the people who have always supported Qantas, and for the future of our aviation industry and the role that so many people would like to play, Australians would like to play in that future in the years ahead. And I am a passionate advocate of Qantas, Mr Deputy Speaker, but I am a realist as well, and I know that a government that is serious cannot govern by nostalgia and sentiment. It can't govern by emotion. It must govern by the hard realities of the challenges that we face. Qantas is facing a difficult and challenging international aviation market. There's no doubt about that, and the Shadow Minister is right to point out that it has been principally government-owned and supported carriers that have been the dominant force within the international aviation market for a long time. It's not a new phenomenon. Those who will remember what happened with Ansett and other things many years ago will remember that as well. and the commercial issues that go around these challenging issues in the aviation industry understand that. It's not new. And so the question for us today is, how do we make Qantas stronger? How do we equip it to be able to combat the challenges that they face in the future and succeed, as they always have succeeded? See, Mr Deputy Speaker, I and my colleagues on this side of the House have faith in Qantas's ability, and particularly the people in Qantas. The people have always worked within Qantas, whether it's in any aspect of their operations, that they have the passion and commitment to this business to make it succeed in the future. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, to allow them to do that, we have to remove the constraints that are placed upon them. We can't just pretend that the environment they're facing is some sort of myth. It's not, it's real. And what Qantas needs is the ability to be able to work with equity partners that can play the role in the future that they need them to play. And we can't keep those potential partners locked behind closed doors, as the Qantas Sale Act of 1992 does. It prevents them from being able to engage in Qantas's future and to provide the support for that future. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, by continuing to lock them out, we deny the opportunities that the Qantas employees will need to be part of a very successful Qantas in the future. Mr Deputy Speaker, Qantas have the job of running this airline, not the government. That was decided by this place in 1992. Those opposites seem to be wanting to govern by retrospective now. They want to take us back to 1992. In fact, they want to take us back to before 1992. They want to say that the equity partner, default equity partner even, in Qantas should be the taxpayer. But we decided that, Mr Deputy Speaker, back in 1992. So unless those opposite are suggesting that we should buy back Qantas, as they did in large part in New Zealand, and for the government to actually now be the controlling interest in Qantas, as the member for Gorton seems to somehow think we still are, then they should put that view. And I think that's exactly what the Shadow Minister was doing today. He is suggesting, and those opposites suggesting, is that the equity partner that Qantas needs is the Australian taxpayer. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, not only do we not agree with that position, but this parliament did not agree with that position in 1992 when Labor in government decided to sell Qantas. And when you make that decision, Mr Deputy Speaker, and you go forward and you decide that Qantas is going to be on a private path, not a government-run airline like so many others are, then you have to commit to a success as a private business into the future, and you have to give it the options and the opportunities that it needs to be successful in that environment. And that means, Madam Speaker, Mr Deputy Speaker, that means passing the measures that are in this bill that are before the parliament today, to enable them to be able to attract the equity partners in their long-term future that they need. We've decided that won't be the government, and those opposite voted for that back in 1992, unless they're now saying they're going to recant. Having made that decision, then you now need to lift those restrictions that enable them to be able to have a future, which means Australian jobs within Qantas in the future. And the other thing you have to do, Mr Deputy Speaker, is you have to remove other restrictions that impede their ability to be profitable. And the carbon tax with a bill of $106 million. $106 million. And for the opposition to sneeze that this is some trivial consequence for Qantas. So what are they suggesting? That we should invest $106 million in Qantas. That's what they seem to be suggesting. Well, they can do that, I suppose, effectively by getting rid of the carbon tax. There's $106 million of support for Qantas today. Yeah, but year on year, $106 million and more, because it will become greater under the previous government's carbon tax. So there's some direct support, if you like, but delivered in a way that this government delivers support, by freeing up businesses in this country to be able to run their businesses And it's no different for Qantas than it is for the many thousands of small businesses, and I acknowledge the Minister for Small Business here at the table, and the many small businesses in my community of the Shire, because they're doing the same thing. They don't come knocking on my door asking for a debt guarantee. What they come is asking me to get regulation out of their way which helps them to employ people and allow them to do business and to succeed, because that's the spirit of small business in my electorate, as I know it is in small businesses around the country. And we have to let Qantas and their management take responsibility for the decisions they take into the future and give them the things they need and the options they need to be able to put forward their plans for that company, because their board runs that company. And boards, like governments, will be responsible, and managements will be responsible for the decisions they take and the impact that has on their shareholders and on their employees. Now, that is the way we run the economy in this country, and that's the way we should run the economy in this country. And if those opposite are somehow suggesting something different, then they should be very clear about that. Qantas is a tremendous, wonderful national airline. The good news is we have other national airlines today, and Virgin is one of those. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, there are protections that already exist within the various legislation which govern aviation arrangements, which continue to apply equally to not only Qantas but also any other national carriers that will be acting consistent with our international aviation agreements. The Navigation Act applies to other airlines, including Virgin and Qantas' subsidiary Jetstar. Qantas International would have to stay majority Australian-owned. As for their domestic operations, they are subject to review by the Foreign Investment Review Board. No changes there. Our international air service agreements impose ownership and control restrictions to ensure only Australian international airlines can access our traffic rights, and under these restrictions Australian international airlines must be substantially owned and effectively controlled by Australian nationals. At least 2/3 of the board members must be Australian citizens. The chairperson of the board must be an Australian citizen. The airline's head office must be in Australia. The airline's operational base must be in Australia, and the government has no plans to change these criteria, which will continue to apply to Qantas's international operations. And that is not to mention the Fair Work Act, the Corporations Act, immigration laws, which I am responsible for, Mr Deputy Speaker, and other regulations that affect every other Australian business. There are safeguards and there are protections regarding those operations. So those opposites seem to be arguing that a foreign equity provider and shareholder in Qantas domestic is somehow going to run the Australian domestic operations in another country. Apparently they're going to run a domestic aviation service in Australia by flying around some other country, which is absurd. Of course, like with Virgin, as the Minister for Transport I think has argued very well in this place in recent days, Virgin is employing Australians in Australia. They're on those planes every day, moving millions of people around every single week. That's the future I want for Qantas as well, because that has been Qantas's past, it is its present, and it will be its future, Mr Deputy Speaker, so long as this place and the other place decide to put a vote of confidence in Australian business, in Australian employees, and the ability of this airline, this great airline, who I know from first-hand experience as a former Managing Director of Tourism Australia, have given unparalleled support to the Australian tourism industry in this country. Sadly, under the previous government, that went awry, and that will be for those who are responsible for that to explain one day. But Qantas had always stumped up when it was in my field of operations to observe. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, that will continue. It will be a good future for Qantas. It won't be the same as its past, but that is true for all business, as the Minister for Small Business knows. We can't somehow wish away the circumstances that all businesses face today and pretend somehow we can be nostalgic and sentimental about these difficult decisions. For Qantas to go forward, this government and this parliament must get out of its way and free it up to find the partners in the future that it so richly deserves, its employees richly deserve, and awaits it. And the only thing standing in the way of that, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the Leader of the Opposition and his cohorts in the Senate. And for my electors, Mr Deputy Speaker, I hope that the Leader of the Opposition will have a change of heart and decide to support Qantas by supporting this bill.